I'm happy you're here because I usually have, so first of all, it's very common for me to have a Columbia person here.
So I've
I've
heard.
had almost all the Columbia people here, but it's not common for me to have someone here that doesn't work specifically with notation,
I
you
didn't
know?
send you a single score,
Not a
did I?
single score, yeah, even though I asked. And then I remembered, you know what, Danny probably doesn't want me to have the scores.
You open the score and be like,
Wait,
Danny,
what?
this isn't going to help.
Exactly,
Do
yeah.
you have a different version?
So I want to actually start with showing an excerpt from one of those pieces. This is going to be something that you did on the Serge modular system. Let's hear a couple minutes of that. Visually, you start pulling chords like crazy, in that section.
That was a real learning process. Like
Yeah.
learning how to use the chords or the patch cables in some kind of way. Like, because I usually have like a rack that you put them on, and you're like, okay, I'll take this one, I'll go like this. But like during a live performance, you can't take your little rack that's drilled into the wall. Like, you gotta figure out a way to like grab and go. So the best thing I found is like you wrap around your neck, and then you're like, okay, I need a long one, and you like reach for it and rip it out, and you're like, okay, that's the one, yeah, and then shit's flying off of you, and then you make a big mess. But it's like, that's the beauty of modular synthesis. Like, it's a big mess.
So let's back up a little bit, because I also need a little education in this. When you have something like this right in front of you, like what are you trying to do, first of all? Like, back up to the beginning. You have this machine in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got all these cords on your neck. What are you actually doing in front of that machine? Like, what's happening to make all those sounds?
That's the question, right? Like, it's a blank canvas. I mean, it depends on the context. Like, am I teaching? Am I performing? Am I exploring? Am I like trying to learn something? It's your canvas. Like, it's your big metal box with holes in it. And you're like, okay, where do I start?
But like, let's say like the excerpt that we just saw, it looks like you're improvising, right? This is a 2-minute excerpt from a half-hour
Yeah.
set, basically.
Yeah.
So in the very beginning of the excerpt, you state that, you're looking to start from basically nothing, right?
Yeah.
And then you have this whole blurb about, having patience and letting it kind of grow on its own. To me, it sounds like, from my kind of layman electronic music ears, it sounds like you're like exploring through improvisation from the very beginning to the end. Is that right? Or did you have kind of a plan of what you were going to do?
I like that you said that, because I wanted it to feel like kind of fresh, but also have some kind of like narrative to it. So the piece was like, I mean, with modular synthesizers, you, especially like something like the Serge synthesizer, it was the 50th anniversary of it, and I was using my machine and the Columbia's machine, and like they're both analog gear. The Columbia machine's probably built in the 80s, and so it's they're these fragile systems, and the idea of like analog and modular is like you're never gonna get the same sound twice, right? You like take your cable, you plug something in, and then you go to the bathroom and someone comes into the room. They're like, oh my God, look, a synthesizer. What's this?
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, you like leave the door open for too long, or like you go get a snack.
People are just going to go and start screwing around with whatever you're doing? That's common?
That's what I do.
It's like a prank. Well, that's what you do. Okay.
That's what I do. If I see someone working on their patch, I'm like, let me change this up a little bit.
Let me screw around with this.
Right? It's like, because they're so inviting, it's like, oh, what does this do? But with that mentality of like, you come back and it's gone, it's like always kind of this study in ephemerality. You make something and you go into it with this mentality that you're never going to be able to reproduce the sound again. And what you are doing in that moment is very much live composing and then letting go and continuing on. What was the question?
Well, that was basically the question. I mean, like, what are you kind of thinking about when you're starting? Because to me, I mean, this is always a question, right? Like, does something feel improvised? Is it not improvised? Does it even matter if it's improvised, right?
Sure.
But to me, and part of it was reading a little blurb about the piece, about having it coming out of a place of patience, right? To me, it feels like when you're starting it, like you literally were starting from basically a sine wave, right? Or
starting from scratch.
Yeah, or even before that.
Plugged in.
Right. Oh, nothing plugged in. So even before a sine wave, right?
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, I don't really get like a semblance of anything to hold on to until the excerpt I played, which was like 9 minutes in.
Sure.
The whole thing is like half an hour.
Sure.
So I thought that was very interesting because you're like literally starting, like, forget this idea of rhythm, forget even pitch, forget even sound.
Yeah.
You're starting way before all that stuff was in the air. And I think, to me, that's interesting because when you have like a jazz improvisation or something, like you have an expectation of what you're going to hear when you got that jazz combo in front of you. When you got this machine with all these chords around you, even me, someone with a degree in music, I don't really 100% know what I'm going to see when you're playing that thing.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine in person, what it would have been like. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's my instrument. So if you put me in front of
That's
a cello,
the thing. It's your instrument. Right. That's the other thing. It's your instrument. Yeah. Right. It's what you're used to playing.
Yeah.
And it's also very different than what most people do. Like I can't, for the life of me, you put me in front of that thing, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right. So I guess the piece was, it came from a point of improvisation because it has to. There was a lot of work of being like, okay, this section comes first, this section comes next. And I had kind of a rough progression about like what I was going to do, but then the spots in between, or like, what actually collected in those spaces. It's kind of like an ebb and flow, or it's kind of like, I'd like, in a perfect world, I'd like it to do this, but it's not always going to do that. And so it's then you're playing with the machine as you're continuing this composition.
And when you're like putting very basic, when you're putting the chords in, right, and you put one hole in here and one hole over here, do you know exactly what's going to happen when you do that, or is it also like a discovery for you? Because to me, I'm like, I can't even imagine like how it's like almost like somebody that doesn't know necessarily. Doesn't have perfect pitch, I don't know, let's say, and you're playing on the keyboard, you're just kind of feeling your way around. You don't know exactly what would happen if I hit this key and then this key. I have an idea it's going to be a big leap, but I don't know, I can't hear in my head, from C to B it sounds like this.
Yeah.
Is it similar with you, or what's going to happen when you put that thing in the next one?
At some point you don't know, because modular synthesis is not always linear. So it's not always A goes to B goes to C. Like here, of course, when I have my patch cable plugged in and I plug it into a triangle wave and I bring that triangle wave into the mixer. Like I know that's going to make a triangle wave. I can kind of see where that dial is, so I know where the frequency roughly is going to be. But the beauty of modular synthesis is once you have that connection created, you can have another connection that goes to that original spot and acts as some form of modulation. So what you can do is, so here I have my triangle wave, we're listening to triangle wave. It's like, oh, it's really nice. And then we can plug another waveform into the triangle wave that'll make it go woo, woo, woo. And so that's still linear, right? I have, this wave that is modulating my triangle wave that we're listening to. But then when things get tricky is, okay, we have this waveform modulating my triangle wave that's going to the mixer. But then what if I take that triangle wave that we're listening to and plug it back into the source of modulation? So before we had this kind of sequence of something that's dictating the rhythm of the pitch, like the rhythm of the modulation, and we have our baseline pitch. But now once we plug it back into itself is we have kind of this closed circuit of our triangle wave is then controlling the speed of the modulation wave that is then in turn modulating the triangle wave. So it's kind of like this giant cycle of, oh, I wonder what this is going to do. And so that's only using two oscillators. But here I have this giant machine where if, A goes to B goes to C, C goes to G, G's plugged back into D, D then is then routed to A, and you have this whole big mess of signals routing to and from each other.
And there's no way to reproduce it perfectly, even if you put all the cables in the way that you did the first time. Is there a way to reproduce? Let's say you find something you really like, doing what you described. You can just hit record.
You can hit record,
right?
Yeah, but it's also since it's analog, that the humidity shifts in the room and the circuits bend a little bit and your pitch changes, or the room gets warmer and then the circuits get warm and then something changes again. So to get the exact same thing, of course it's possible, but there's so many factors that are really kind of pushing against that sameness.
Wow. And all those things you just described right now, which was great. That's exactly what I wanted to get out of you, actually.
What do you do?
I want to know what are the sounds that you're actually manipulating, and that you described that beautifully. I mean, when you're actually doing the performance, because there's a lot of things you're doing at one, and of course you have an audience watching you, which is different. Most people that they're working with modular synthesis, I feel like they're doing it in Ableton, or they're doing it in Logic, they're doing it on their DAW at home, where you're not, you don't have that pressure of a live performance, but you are, you specialize in doing more of that kind of thing. Of course, you can do the DAW stuff too, but that your interest is more in the performing aspect, performative aspect. I mean, when you are out there, are you thinking about all these things when you're plugging away, or is it after the fact, oh, that actually was a great sound? Or maybe it's both.
I blacked out. I don't remember.
Really?
No. I mean, I'd done it so many times, but it takes full concentration. And in that way, it's almost like a meditation, right? But moving along that a little bit further, it's never my mastery over the machine. It's a collaboration working with the synthesizer. And so it's never oh, I'm trying to get that one pitch again. It's always oh, that's new, huh? And in the context of a live performance, you work with that and then see how you can kind of guide that into a space that you think is sonically interesting or something.
So you don't want, it's okay if you don't hear the same thing, twice in a row. It's okay. It's not
why would I want to hear the same thing twice?
It's a different mentality than your standard, conservatory trained pianist or something, where, if they're playing that Chopin etude and they're, for whatever reason, they're off that day and it sounds different, they're gonna beat themselves up over it. But for you, no, it's just a different sound. That's just how it is that day for you. It's the
beauty of the machine.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I mean, I have a lot of respect for it, because there are times when I'm sitting there, I say, okay, I want an electronic sound. Then I just give up and I say, I'm just going to go with one of the factory presets and forget this. Why am I trying to create something out of nothing when there's all these other sounds? And I don't know if you do the same thing. If you ever say, I don't want to deal with creating my own sound today, I'm going to go with the factory Does that ever happen to you?
No, that's boring.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
It's what I do, right?
Right. That's the whole point.
If you said, all right, Dani, you're going to write an orchestra piece, I'd be no, I'm not. But creating my own sound, that's fascinating. It's exploring, right? I was never good at I had piano lessons and guitar lessons as a kid, but I never got good at playing it all the way through a piece. I'd get kind of a page in and be it's fine. And with guitars, I never, was really great at like songwriting, but I liked to find this one little area and then just kind of like dabble in it. And so I feel like a lot of synthesis comes out of just like kind of dabbling and tweaking things and finding the little beauties that come out spontaneously, or you're working really hard to make a sound and something else comes out, or something interesting comes out.
I mean, I think it's interesting you pointed out you would never write for orchestra, which I remember when you were writing. I'm going to play this next piece, Magnolias in Bloom, which is basically for a mini orchestra. It's got like I think 6 or 7 players or so. Let's hear a couple minutes of that. You'll see what I mean.
I don't even remember the piece.
Really?
No.
Come on. That's a great piece. I love this piece because I remember we were on the same show. I had a piece on the show. I don't remember what order it was, but I remember, obviously I heard your piece and thinking you were having so much difficulty. I remember conceptualizing what you wanted to do, right? Because you were telling me, I don't know what to do with these players. I'm used to, writing my own thing or, conceiving a piece the way we just heard it.
Yeah.
A few minutes ago with your Serge modular piece.
Right.
Now you have all these live musicians that are used to reading notation.
Yeah.
How are you going to transfer your language to those guys? So I thought it was going to be an interesting challenge for you. For me, it's like I'm used to it. It wasn't like a big leap for me to have a piece on that show. But for you, I knew it was, and it was really amazing to hear what you ended up with. It's completely different, right? You're dealing with acoustic instruments, but you still were able to get that electronic feel to it, but in a very different way.
Did I?
I think so.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I want to know, because we never talked about this. I mean,
Yeah.
the piece just kind of happened, and then we all kind of went our separate ways. So I want to know how the heck did you even conceive of this piece from the beginning? Because it's just different than what you usually do.
I think that was my first purely acoustic piece. No, the ceramics were mic'd. Does that count as acoustic?
I think, I mean, compared to your other stuff, this is like, this is like
Right.
Monteverdi,
Yeah, that piece was really challenging. It was challenging for a number of ways. It was like, what do I do with this ensemble? Man, I thought the bassoon was fascinating.
Yeah?
Well, the bassoon is, it's this very dorky. Like, the way I thought about these instruments is like, okay, the bassoon has this double reed, and the double reed is similar to a square wave. Right, and the way that it vibrates, you have these two double reeds that produce this waveform that's close to a square wave. And so I didn't think of it like I don't know the bassoon's range. I don't know. I looked up like bassoon sounds and what they can do, but I knew what kind of, like what electronic composition has taught me is like, what kind of texture do I want? What kind of timbre do I want to hone in on? And through these timbres, how do I want to express myself? I guess the quality of the sound always comes first, and the notation is kind of secondary. Like this whole thing was, it was a big graphic score. And like, yeah, it was a challenge, but I think once I had some kind of narrative in mind, it came a little bit easier. So if I walk you through the piece, it's centered around these flutes that are made of ceramics. I started doing ceramics, I think in 2019. I don't know. I was like, I don't want to compose anymore. I want to be an artist. Why not ceramics? And I did it at Columbia, and then I had this really wonderful professor who, like, I was like, oh, like, I think I want to stick with this. And it's funny because ceramics has a very similar feel in a way to modular synthesis. It's very much this brain to hand to object kind of like creative process. You know, like it's live. The synthesizer will track your movements because like, oh, I've moved this modulation source here and that's going to affect something. And like, you know, your thumbprint is really in each one of your electronic patches. And like your thumbprint is literally in your clay. Like you make a little pinch pot, you fire that's going to be around for 5,000 years. And like just this like process of creating felt very similar and very fluid with ceramics. Making this piece, I had all of these like really thin flutes that I had made. So one of the things about ceramics is you can have it in 3 different states. You can have it in what's called bone dry, which is unfired, which the flutes were in. So they did not go through the kiln. They were very fragile, and water breaks them back down into mud, essentially. And then you can have the next section, which is going through the kiln once, which is called, you bisque. And so they're semi-porous, but you know, if you tap it, it's not going to break. And then the final stage of it is called vitrification. So you put it in the kiln, it gets vitrified, and then all of the molecules that are in there, clay shrinks when it's fired, get really tight together, and so then it's waterproof. Like it's like the cup you drink out of. And so these flutes were bone dry flutes. I made about 30 of those flutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was. I think a lot of my work is about labor and process and letting go. I mean, like the synthesizer, right? Like you build this monster patch and then, I don't know, at the end of the day, I unplug it. And this piece was, I made all of these flutes, and then Izzy, who was the flute player in this, she broke them. That was the point, but you know, through rehearsals, through like trials, I worked with her pretty closely in like how to construct this flute. Because you know, the first time I made a flute, it was like, like, what is this thing? And she was like, well, you want to carve this, you want to do this, you make the head a little bit heavier. And so like, all of a sudden I was an instrument maker. But it was really this, I don't know, I guess kind of labor of love to make all these flutes and then to have them kind of disappear.
Well, was it always intentional that the flute would disappear at that moment?
Yeah. So a lot of work comes from grief. That's, I guess, been my driving process through my work in the past 3 or 4 years. And you know, you get from grief to like ephemerality and like life cycles. And I thought it'd be really interesting to explore like the life cycles of, you know, ceramics. And so Izzy was playing with them, and both like, you know, the pressure of playing these very fragile instruments and the moisture in her breath broke down the flute.
I have to say, the first time I saw that happen, I was like, you could feel it in the audience, which you don't usually feel at these new music concerts. Usually it's kind of like very stale kind of audience that doesn't want to show any emotion, right?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we're here because we're listening to new music. But I have to be honest, when that part, and I remember we had also masks, right? We were still wearing masks at that concert. I remember like being very emotional personally when I saw that section where the flute, when I started to realize what was going on, because it happens gradually in the piece, the flute is disintegrating, and then wondering what's going to happen after, you know, this flute's going to be gone at some point, you know, and the piece is not that long, it's only like 10 minutes, but the flute was quickly like leaving us, you know, like evaporating. And then when Izzy put it in the water, right, what happens then? Because there was like, for me, a big emotional turning point. I can't even explain what it was. I never heard it done that way. And also the form leading up to it, was very effective.
Yeah.
And it was for this emotional release, this idea of grief and so on. So what happens when that broken up flute goes into the water? What are we What are we hearing there?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess first I didn't make the piece to like get this emotional reaction out of everyone. It was just like, this is the piece that I'm going to make. Like, this is kind of. But what happened with the flute is, okay, so we had a little tub of water, and inside the water we had a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone. And clay is, before it's vitrified, is a porous material. And so when it broke, she then took the shards and she put it in that little tub of water, and you could hear the clay breaking back down into a slurry. So all the little air bubbles racing towards the top. Like I heard that sound like first time in my undergrad, and my professor described it as like 1,000 demons leaving this little ceramic pot. And it's just like, it's this beautiful organic kind of rainforesty sound of air bubbles coming to the top. And sometimes they're bigger, sometimes they're smaller. It's the clay breaking down. And like, at the end of the show, I had this like jar of water with like a big clump of clay at the bottom. That was basically like a paste.
And can you hear that without the hydrophone in the water?
If you put your ear close to it, yeah. But if I don't think if you top mic'd it, you'd hear it like a little bit. It's really that underwater amplification.
So is it like hearing the vibration of the water? Is that what's happening? Like the way like a microphone picks up vibration of the air, or like how does
a hydrophone work?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like a beefed up contact mic.
Okay.
And since sound travels better in water, the sounds are a little bit more clear and a little bit more precise. Yeah,
versus a contact mic where you're like touching something solid usually. You're not getting like the full spectrum of sound that you would get. I mean, at least for me, I never heard, again, someone with we're getting these advanced degrees. I've never seen, it's very humbling for me because I've never seen that, before. And I've never seen anybody record underwater, and then put it, and not only that, but put it in a piece that's live in front of an audience. Not only that, it's combined with other instruments, and you have to also balance the sounds and all of this stuff going on. So what happened then? We were kind of talking about this a little bit before, but what happened then? Like, how did you get this idea, this conceptual idea? How did you translate it to the players? Because I remember also you telling me. I remember that week because I came into the rehearsals. I was like, I kind of felt bad. I have to be honest. Now that it's been a while, I could say this. I felt bad because I went into the rehearsal and I don't even think I showed up to the first rehearsal because everything was in the score, And then you came out of rehearsal. I remember you were like really stressed out, and all this stuff. And you were like asking me for advice on how to, rehearse the band. I said, I don't know, like for me, my problem is I don't have good advice because I just sit around and do nothing because the conductor is doing all the work. I'd just say, that sounds right. That's why I kind of felt bad because for me, everything is notated, right? So there's not much question. But for you, it was quite the opposite. So how did the whole rehearsal process go?
It was figuring out how to articulate what I actually wanted. Like I had the score that I didn't send you. That was very. It was vague, It was a graphic score. It wasn't necessarily a text-based graphic score. It wasn't a precise graphic score. It was kind of just like it was vibes, right? Or it was it was more than that.
Because there are some colleagues of ours that do graphic scores, but like they're basically full sketch scores. Right, I mean, like there is very little wiggle room.
Yeah.
But yours wasn't that way.
It was maybe a mix in between. Like I knew at the beginning I wanted these sounds to be looping, and so I like notated. I'm like, okay, I want the guitar doing this. I want the ceramics doing this. Oh, and I also had the percussionist was playing ceramic bowls that I made. And so it was like kind of like how there was like little tiny notes on what I wanted each player to be doing, but then in practice it was kind of like, oh, I didn't think it was going to sound like that. And so it was, standing in front of them and kind of being like, hey, this is actually what I'd like you to do. Which is funny because, back to modular synthesis, it's like when I'm playing the synthesizer, it's never, we're going to do this. It's always like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But it turns out that's not how orchestras usually work or ensembles usually work.
No, they usually get annoyed, actually, if the composer doesn't know what they want,
They may have been a little annoyed.
Yeah, it's very, because I was just at an orchestra rehearsal and like literally, conductor turns around, asks me a question. If I don't have an answer in half a second, everyone loses all respect for me, right? But this process was the opposite. You had to get input. Did you get input from the musicians too? Like,
Yeah.
okay, you want this kind of sound, but you don't know exactly how to achieve it. So this is one way to do it. Did you get to have more back and forth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Izzy was really helpful with like
Yeah.
the flute and stuff. And then the bassoon part of the end, Rebecca Heller, who played it, they're like, do you want this? And I'm like, no. And they're like, do you want this? And I'm like, maybe a little bit more of that. And then they like eventually came up with this tone where I was like, that's it. And yeah, I guess people don't normally work that way with an ensemble.
Let's hear a few seconds, not the whole thing, but let's hear a few seconds of what that bassoon part you're talking about is. Those are multiphonics at the end there.
Mm-hmm. I wanted it to be stomachy, like heart-wrenching, like just like, it sounds a little corny, but like I wanted it to be pure emotion, like I wanted you to feel that sound. And I think they did a really wonderful job portraying that.
Yeah, well, because now that I've been away, because I have to be honest with you, because that's what I do on the show, is that when I heard that bassoon thing, I was like so taken by the water thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I was fine with the piece ending there. But then the bassoon came and I was a little confused, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But now that I've heard your kind of pre-explanation about the idea of grief, the whole process, I can already picture what that part is. That's like the full release, of emotion all at one time. Yeah. Now because I remember I don't even think we had program notes or anything at the show, or we didn't talk before each piece. Yeah. But sometimes I think that's helpful, actually, to get context for what you're thinking about. That's just me, though. Some people don't want any of the context. They just say that piece is what it is on its own. But I like a little bit of that, because then I know a little bit of what to listen for. But now it makes sense. Yeah. Why that bassoon? Because it's like a long stretch of time. It's a couple of minutes, I think, where the bassoon is just kind of playing these.
And there's a lot of silence.
These things, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I also have a visual arts background. I do a lot of sound installation and then putting myself back in kind of the music box doesn't always make sense, and so I try to bring like that other element to sit in there with you. Like, you've never seen this before in music, or no, I'm babbling. I don't know what I'm saying.
No, I mean, I think personally, for me, I learn a lot from somebody like you, because I just have one way of writing. It's actually kind of narrow-minded, and that's part of why I do this show too, because I have different kind of people on. I also learn something along with everybody else. So, and it also gives me a chance to like get a good hour or so listening to your stuff. I mean, I already knew this piece, for example, but the other thing, the Serge modular piece, I didn't hear it. So it was good for me to get kind of like a mini not a full education just from listening, but like for you, are you finished with the degree yet, or you still have a little? No, okay, I shouldn't have asked. Okay.
I gotta go.
But like going through academia, do you think that for people that maybe are interested in doing this kind of work, do you think that it's something that you kind of have to go through the academic route to learn this stuff, or can people learn this on their own, or is it only, because I know you do some stuff too, kind of more in the bandy pop music world as well, not just like this very academic concert music.
Yeah.
Do they have to go this route to kind of learn how to play this stuff, or
No,
no?
absolutely not.
Yeah.
I don't think any of my stuff is really like new music-y kind of, like most of my stuff is rooted in noise. Like you said, you showed this video at about 9 minutes when the groove started coming in. The first 7 minutes it was a feedback loop. So I was playing this circuit that was rerouted back into itself, and it was just making these like insane overtones. I mean, I guess equivalent to like overblowing multiphonics, but inside of the synthesizer.
You're kind of equating it then with it. You're making it sound like it's like new music, not unlike new music.
Oh no, but like
in a way, like I mean the aesthetics that we do.
Sure.
You're talking about multiphonics and
but maybe
these
multiphonics.
overtones.
Multiphonics took that from, noise music.
That's a good
or
point.
Punk music, or, overdriven guitars.
Yeah.
And like a lot of my stuff is just like industrial, noisy, like wall of sound kind of
Well,
stuff.
this is the other thing too, which again, this is something I don't know. The idea of noise music, talking about making music out of noise, because you talk to your average person, they say, if they don't like something, what is this noise?
It's noise,
right?
right?
And I think I have this plaque. I think it's somewhere around here where it says "What is noise" or something. You made this little plaque that I kind of stole from one of your shows.
I was wondering where that went.
And I think it said "What is noise" or
Noise don't quit.
Noise don't quit. Yes,
Yeah.
There's 3 words. Noise don't quit. Right. And it's funny because like I had this video on my main channel talking about one of the reviews I had with this orchestra piece, and this guy just went off the rails saying that my piece is just noise.
Beautiful.
Which is right, but everything actually is just a bunch of harmonies.
Yeah.
But you're actually working with what the academic version or whatever you want to call it of noise is, right? So like when we say noise, what are we actually talking about in terms of in your context?
Yeah, I mean it depends on like the context of it. Like you said, like noise is usually like turn off that noise. It's an unwanted feature, but noise in the context of my music is feedback, oscillation, self-oscillation, positive feedback. It's like a building of sound that it can almost be like a feeling. It's like this intense amount of sound just being pushed.
So you equate it with feeling. It's not, you're not like trying to...
It's all feeling.
You're not like trying to create like, okay, I want the frequency spectrum to look like this. It has nothing to do with that.
No.
Yeah.
It's like you want to listen to it and be like, whoa.
So you want that feeling.
Yeah.
You want that feeling.
It's about tactility. I
Yeah.
think that's what I love about electronic music is I can make, you boost up the subwoofer, or like you play at a venue and they're like, hey, we got 3 subwoofers for you. And I'm like, awesome, let's shake the building. Like it's all about, like I love like that tactileness, the physicality of it. I love like the high-pitched noises or the high-pitched sounds. When you tune your oscillator all the way up and you hear it like right there in your ear, like I think that's really beautiful, and it's something that you don't really enjoy on a day-to-day basis. Like if there's a high-pitched sound on the subway, I'm like, oh my God, like they gotta fix the MTA. But in this context, I'm like, yeah, like let's see if we can go higher. Like, can I move the sound from feeling to here to like feeling to the back of my head, or how can I shift this sound so I feel it, that your body resonates. And so it's an exploration of like finding different points, I think, throughout your own body.
So what I'm taking from this is that there is a distinct difference then that you're trying to do between like hearing a high, construction noise, let's say outside your apartment, versus you actually trying to reproduce sounds that might sound like that, but you're trying to achieve a different result, right? Between those two things. Because like somebody going by, let's say no one knows anything about what you do, they go to the concert, they say, what's the difference between this and the construction jackhammer outside my apartment? This is the answer you would hopefully try to and I guess your performance is more of an argument than anything else, or a thesis for what you're trying to do. Like it's almost like you're convincing somebody else, or do you even care about
I
any
make
of
it
that?
for me.
Yeah.
I make it because I like it. I
Yeah.
make it because I feel it. I had
Because that's how I feel personally
Yeah.
with my stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like I like with me, it's microtonality. That would be the noise factor.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I convince somebody that this is something you want to hear, you
Yeah.
know, or we want to feel,
Yeah.
for example. And I just wonder the same
It's world
with
building.
you. Yeah.
I mean, that's what synthesis is. That's what my music is. It's like these tiny little ecologies where I can be like, ooh, it's like, let's put a building here. Let's make this. Like, here's our little pond. And it's like this whole system that you can kind of just like live in.
Wow. Well, I don't think I can say it any better than that. So let's end it here. Thank you. Appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.